This video is sponsored by nothing. It's nothing. Good day all, RobotnikHolmes here. The 2015 Darth Vader comics. Published under the Marvel brand, they were released alongside the Star Wars comics at the time. The events of both books take place about the same time, right after the events of A New Hope. While the Star Wars comics, which I reviewed in the last video, exhibited thrilling tales of adventure with a full cast of rebel heroes, the Darth Vader comics typically only have the titular dude, with the peeps around him coming and going, either due to lack of plot significance or because, they are oft in a typical Vader fashion. Personally, I enjoy the Vader spin-offs due to how it focuses primarily on one character and fleshes out his motives and personality instead of having to juggle a bunch of different characters at once. There's also an abundance of callbacks that greatly parallel the current story, which are put to really good use here and I really enjoy them. The census of this 2015 comic is to show what Vader does in between movies, and apparently quite a bit goes unnoticed under the public eye. The Empire forms an alliance with Queen Trios, an antagonist from the mainline series, and Palpatine is still a shifty bastard who tests Vader constantly and threatens to replace him with a more loyal servant. That particular threat is in the form of this lizard-eye looking dude, Silo, who just so happens to have a quirky mini-boss squad on his hands to repeatedly challenge Vader throughout the series. It's a pretty typical story arc, with Darth Brooder over here fighting through each of them while slowly piecing together the Emperor's plans. I suppose my only gripe would be the art. The covers are rather plain and greyed out. Kinda looks like someone sneezed on them at some points. And they are especially bland when compared to how grand and dynamic the covers are for the 2017 ones, and the illustrations in the comic itself can appear lackluster at times. They have the same mandates as the mainline comics, where they have to look as close to the original trilogy as possible, and really grand settings aside, like Queen Trios' planet, everything has this big layer of blandness, even if there are cool new settings. And speaking of new, these comics are just as much about Vader as they are about a new character. I've been wanting to talk about her for a while, and here we are. Meet Dr. Aphra, a quirky rogue/archaeologist with severe disloyalty issues. A character who really adds some colour to the Star Wars universe, and I don't just mean those colours. Created by writer Kieran Gillen, she started out as a kind of sidekick for Darth Vader himself, envisioned as a kind of female Indiana Jones type, though she made many more appearances following that, from the main comic alongside Luke and the others, to even getting her own damn spin-off comic. She's just that popular, and one of these days I'd really love to get into these comics at some point. There's just so much to talk about, and the art is really impressive. Aphra was introduced alongside two other peeps, which also helped her rise in popularity, because these two are so freaking funny. Evil doppelgangers or archetypes are an extremely common trope these days, so much so that even I made a jab at it. But having a twisted and murderous counterpart to 3PO and R2-D2? Fricking genius. I can sing good graces about these characters all day, although I think it's time I actually look at these comics now. I've got 6 bloody issues to go through, so let's get a move on. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. In this video, I'm looking at the first 6 issues of the 2015 Darth Vader comics by Marvel Comics. In typical spin-off tradition, the first arc of the Darth Vader comics is simply titled Vader. Doesn't really tell us what's in store, but then again, that's what surprises are for. Issue number 1 starts out on Tatooine, specifically Jabba the Hutt's palace, where our brooding villain aims to make a deal with him. probably appearing as the most violent salesman in the galaxy. Before Darth Vader can even ask the space gangster a question, he is attacked for his rather rude entrance. But being uber powerful with the Force, Vader makes short work of the guards. He sends a guy into the pit by hitting a secret trapdoor button, and he even reflects a shot into Jabba's wine glass.
The bastard!
It's only after being force-choked that Jabba even complies with his demands, and the Sith Lord starts bargaining with him. Hard cut to a flashback, which mainly consists of the now demoted Darth Vader apologising for his failures to Emperor Palpatine, specifically for the events that went down in the mainline comic, and the whole Death Star exploding in A New Hope. It's pretty neat that we get to see from the villain's point of view of how freaking stressed out they are that their plots are being foiled after years of planning. But yeah, the Emperor is hella mad at Vader, and with him sending the Jedi to Tatooine to haggle with Jabba the Hutt, a thing that Vader is completely unaccustomed to doing, the Emperor stays behind to make plans with his new best friend. Coordinator. Never mind. Meet Dr. Silo, the Empire's resident mad scientist and someone who helped create the suit of Darth Vader. He's also the main antagonist of this comic book. Surely we'll know more about him later though, but sadly not why he has given himself an alien eye belonging to Greedo's species for some odd reason. You must think evil monocles are overrated. Before skipping back to the present, we get a few more pages and flashbacks to movie events, all to set up Vader's motivations for the rest of this comic. I appreciate the inclusion of these panels to give more clarity to scenes we only saw in passing in the films, but somehow the comic still gives the characters off proportions. But fear not, I'll give my 2 pennies when I get to the review section. Don't trace other people's work, kids. This issue ends with Darth Vader standing dramatically on a cliff face, surrounded by the burning remains of a Tusken village. Goodness me. Okay, a quick side note, I never jived with how they were the punching bags of the galaxy and always got killed by the cast in self-defense, mind you. Especially nowadays with shows like The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett, reimagining them as the equivalent of Native Americans. But enough about that, back to this poser. I guess that haggling worked out in the end, because he is soon joined by 2 bounty hunters in Jabba's employ. Boba Fett and this hairy fella, Black Kursantan, are hired to look for Luke Skywalker and bring him back alive, which leads to the events in the mainline Star Wars comics. And that's the cliffhanger for this first issue. Hey, you guys want to see the most blatant filler episode in the entirety of Star Wars comics? The plot of issue 2 is pretty bloody superfluous, considering everything stays the same. In a space battle, Darth Vader flies around with his TIE fighter buddies and targets wayward ships. Meanwhile, Vader is lectured with graphs that Grand General Tag shows him. The dude seems to enjoy bossing the Sith around, considering he's basically his superior now. Along with an astro droid, Vader is assigned to attack a space pirate base, which don't seem that interesting, except that they have connections to a mysterious Aphra, and they have prequel little shooty dudes for defense. Though it's not anything Vader can't destroy, and they collect all the info they need before the self-destruct sequence is activated. Back at base, Vader states that one of Tag's lieutenants was a spy for the pirates, and gives them a good talking to. The issue ends with Vader meeting the helpful droid from earlier, and it's implied that the droid had framed that lieutenant. To cover the evidence, Vader orders it into an airlock, and he sends it into space to blow it up. Well, that was a whole lot of nothing. I'm just left very confused as to what the writer was aiming for in this issue. Ah, here we are! The first canonical appearance of the rogue Dr. Aphra. For once, I actually enjoy this cover regardless of the old-timey filter over it. The variant cover is pretty cool too, loving the Empire Strikes Back iconography. Issue number 3 starts off with the titular archaeologist doing what she does best, sneaking into facilities and stealing important trinkets. In this case, it's a personality chip that she intends to insert into her droid, the Matrix itself called 000. She barely makes it out after accidentally setting off the alarm, and she does the cool Indiana Jones thing and rolls under closing doors, but she winds up getting caught anyway. This curator dude, named Utani Zane, corners her with a bunch of gold-painted Clone War droids, threatening to send her to prison for what seems like the millionth time. Thankfully, Vader just happens to arrive in the car park nearby, and he lends the girl a hand after destroying the droids. In a chamber strangely reminiscent of that of Cloud City's, Aphra tries to nab the personality matrix while Vader finishes off the curator with what appears to be a light prod of his lightsaber. Seems pretty harmless in this illustration though. So, Aphra is saved and Vader decides to hire her, and they fly off in her ship, the Archangel. Those shooty droids that he fought in the previous issue were supposedly reprogrammed by her, and he, going under the Emperor's nose, wishes to use her purposes for some secret plan he's hatching. Together with her computer and Vader's surprising skills in codes, they both activate 000 in this old 3PO-like model. This guy, this frickin' guy, the very moment he's activated, he boasts about his expertise at translation, etiquette, and torture. Yep, 000 is pretty much an evil counterpart to 3CPO, and he carries most of the comic's humour in just how dark and gleeful he is about murder. Even better, he is quickly joined by an astromech buddy named BT-1, who actually possesses enough firepower in his tiny body to take out an army, and no, I'm not even frickin' kidding. After calming down the pseudo-astromech, the pressure increases on Aphra as she starts to realise who is here to ask for her services. She doesn't think too highly of herself and finds Vader's high opinions on her to be misjudged, but she is all in on that kind of job and joins him at the drop of a hat. Vader reveals that in the past as Anakin, he commanded clone armies, so he wants to relive that kind of lifestyle with a secret army of droids. Yeah, you know the Force Unleashed games, where Darth Vader has a secret Jedi apprentice behind the Emperor's back? Well, now he's gonna have a whole droid army, and you know what, that's pretty exciting. I wanna see that. This issue ends with Aphra putting in the coordinates for the desert planet Geonosis, a place very familiar with Vader back when he was Anakin, and they set off for their first adventure together. Man, the years have not been very kind to Geonosis. What used to be the instigator of the Clone Wars and the home of those weird bug people is now a husk of a planet with their decayed skeletons littering its surface. But the gang is here on a mission to steal and reprogram a droid army of their own, and they send 000 and BT to scout this creepy cave network. It is also in this issue that we see a recurring staple of Darth Vader comics, callbacks to moments in the movies that creatively parallel what's going on in the present. You see very little of it in the 2015 book, so I'm glad we get to see little flashbacks to see what Vader is thinking of. Inside the caverns, the two droids stumble into what appears to be charred corpses of old droids, which are all up in their faces like zombies. It's really unnerving, but thankfully they don't seem pretty fond of fire. This seems to prove Aphra's theory that there is still an active factory underground, but the factories are all rusted and destroyed, and there's not a living Geonosian in sight. The answer to all this will leave you shooketh. There's a still living queen down here who hooked herself to machinery and is producing eggs that hatch into the gross droid zombies they met earlier. That's both cool and extremely gross. Vader leaps in and decides to kill the hellish thing, who seems to recognize him somehow. With the help of Vader's force powers and the Archangel bombing the ceiling, the gang is able to steal the egg-laying machine to use for their own purposes, and fly off in a stolen Naboo starship that Vader is also very familiar with. Woo, off they go. Pretty soon, the gang are able to get the machine working, and it poops out mechanically altered droid dudes, and the mission is a total success. However, Aphra is extremely savvy of Darth Vader's business practices, and how he always kills those that he no longer has a use for. She even requests that she be slain via lightsaber instead of being injected into space, an action that she has a pathological fear of. Aphra brings up her now common characteristic of being extremely untrustworthy, but Vader decides to keep her in his employ, though he threatens her with death if she ever blackmails him. Quite suddenly, Black Kersantan comes in with Dr. Silo, who Vader wishes to interrogate to get information about the Emperor's plans. Well, he's not going to do it, but 000 is certainly eager to go through with it. Afterwards, Vader is able to get his name, which seems to have a number on the end of it for reasons we don't know yet, and the location of his super secret hideout. 000 also killed him in the process, apparently getting too carried away with his murderous tendencies, but no one seems to care. Oh, 000. The issue ends with the bad guys setting off to Silo's base, a seemingly organic structure, and with the revelation that Vader's not only fighting the Emperor's new best friend, but also his replacements. Well, crap, we can't have that, can we? Time to beat them up. Jesus Christ, who would have guessed that Silo's base was located inside a goddamn space whale? No, a whole herd of them. That's so freaky that even Aphra is impressed. She's enjoying this whole adventure just as much as the audience is, I'm positive. The gang enter the whale fortress in the most dramatic way possible, first shorting out everything with an ion charge, and then cutting down the front door. Psych! No, that's just how the droids came in. Silly you. Everyone knows that Vader enters via whale flesh. The hole in the wall causes everyone in the room to be sucked out into space, except for the main characters who have magnets on their feet. No, really, that's how they explain it. And Vader and his small droid army go in for the kill. Aphra acts as mission control and guides Vader and co towards the dojo, whatever that is. And when the squad splits up, one group encounters two humans. They were just standing there in the open, I guess, and they mistake this droid army for their next test. Meet Morit and Aelin Astart, a pair of twins who were cybernetically enhanced to take on Vader himself. They soon trap Vader in a room with them and proceed to fight with lightsabers of their own. Look at them running around the room. Okay, they aren't Jedi, and they use, cybernetic trickery to imitate the powers of the Force, but they do prove themselves to be pretty powerful as a duo. However, the fight is quickly halted by Silo, who thinks the time for fighting is best left in the next issue. Can you believe it? We're almost at the end. The mad scientist reveals himself as Silo number 5 and explains that no matter how many times he may be killed, a clone will always take his place, with the memories accumulated from his fallen clone. The dude's essentially immortal, and he reveals the natural evolution of the Force, its replacements, this lovely band of dudes, also cybernetically enhanced, and doing silly poses I thought only the Suicide Squad could pull off. Hey. Before Vader can kill off this apparent blasphemy to the idea of the Force, the Emperor steps in and orders him not to fight. Instead, he came here to watch the Cyber Squad beat the crap out of Darth Vader, and that's where this issue ends. Yep, looks like we got a boss battle on our hands. The ensuing battle in issue number 6 is the perfect time to introduce these bad guys. At least we get a little bit of backstory and explanation before Vader beats them up, or rather kill them in the case of this poor unnamed Trandoshan warrior here. Anyway, he's dead. These two we've already met before. Next, we're introduced to the Imperial scientist Tulan Voidgazer, who's in control of all these floating laser drones. She's probably the most interesting out of all the Cyber Squad. Not just for her design and abilities, but because she has a deep resentment for Vader and blames him for the deaths of her colleagues on board the Death Star. Lastly, we have the Mon Calamari Commander Corbin, who in universe is a huge fanboy for General Grievous and essentially the same character but with a fish head. He doesn't do much outside of the Vader Down special though. The Battle Royale truly starts after a short sparring session, the Lizard Man gets killed, and then the Emperor is like, that's enough for today, everyone take 5. Also, I only expect 1 survivor out of the lot of you. Well, gee, I wonder which of these guys are gonna survive until the end of the book. Poor lizard guy though. The Emperor has a private chat with Vader and talks to him about his secret droid army. He's not mad, but eerily impressed. However, Vader's pretty mad that the Emperor was even planning on replacing him as far back as the events on Mustafar. But the Emperor just waves away any retorts, saying that he will just have to prove himself again. Vader's probably regretting all of his life choices right now. We're nearing the end, so bear with me. Vader goes back to the Archangel to mope, even snapping at Aphra before they fly away from the whale fortress. However, the rogue archaeologist brings up that Boba Fett is here to deliver a message. Oh yeah, I almost forgot about that. Later on, in the exact same events that we saw in the Star Wars comic, Boba Fett reveals that he lost the boy he was looking for, but he was able to get his surname. Goodness me, that all too familiar name sure does get to Vader. He doesn't express anything outwardly, but inside he recalls many memories as Anakin and how his wife Padme had been pregnant. She's long dead, but her children are still out there, and one of them is his son. The rage building up inside of him comes to such a point that he channels the Force and cracks the glass and destroys parts of the surrounding machinery. Then he rushes and goes to FaceTime with his boss and confront him about the matter, but he instead bows and continues to pledge his loyalty. Following that lovely conversation, Vader sits in his chair in self-reflection, probably for the longest time considering how many ships have flown by outside, and he acknowledges his son's existence along with the other memories racing in his half-machine brain. The final page has him claim that he will get his son onto his side as he glares out of the window at his Star Destroyer fleet. It's dramatic as hell, but I wouldn't have it any other way. While it neatly fitted between the events of the movies in terms of setting and character dynamics, the 2015 Darth Vader comics don't quite get their stride when compared to the 2017 or even the 2020 books. There's more focus on operations and a whole lot of talking, which is pretty typical of Star Wars media, but it doesn't exactly help this comic spin-off. The later books do a vastly better job at recalling past events and presenting appropriate threats for Darth Vader to face. Whereas in this comic, we have the Geonosis operation and Vader realizing he has a son. The whole zombie droid concept was as interesting as it was horrifying, especially with a return of the Geonosian Queen from the cartoon, which Anakin had also fought before. It's cool that Vader got to meet her and challenge her in combat again, this time as a powered-up cyborg. What an amazing dark redux of that episode that was. And again, the use of flashback images dispensed in between panels was used quite effectively. They do a terrific job at showing the stoic bad guy's inner thoughts, and nothing brings that out best than his extremely talkative sidekicks. In fact, let's talk about them. Dr. Aphra and her murder bot brigade are probably my favourite Vader sidekicks ever, even better than the droids he hangs out with in the other two comics. 000 and BT make for a radically chaotic duo, and I love that they get a lot of exceptionally enjoyable moments. Especially 000. He gets some of the best dialogue. It's dark humour all around. Aphra in general is both well written and extremely likeable. Her banter and nervous admiration of Vader provides most of the laughs in the first few issues. She's got a cool design, and she's not even written as a typical spunky female sidekick, so props on the writer for that. Her very presence makes the humour bar raise a little. Before, the story was generally void of any fun moments, and was pretty much on 100% brood mode. Then Aphra stumbles into the story, and suddenly it becomes a rad adventure with a rogue and her murderous bots and boss. They even find a way to make the ominous Anakin flashbacks funny on one page. Aphra adds a kind of fun but untrustworthy energy, not only to the cast, but the comic as a whole. However, I rather like her in her spin-off more than I do in her appearance in this comic, for a couple of reasons actually, but for that, I'll have to get into my gripes with the art for this spin-off comic as a whole. I've stated in my previous Star Wars video that I'm not a fan of Salvador Larroca's art. In this book especially, it is very flat, and often looks like scenes and characters are traced wholesale over screenshots of the movies, and in most cases they are. While passable, I don't much care for how he drew Aphra in some of these panels either. It might just be a case of early characterization, but let me just say that you can clearly tell a dude drew her. I'm just saying, the male gaze is strong with this artist. The other human characters looked pretty bland too, which really didn't help with the slog that was issue number 2's story. The fight scenes weren't bad, but I've definitely seen better. The big Cyber Squad battle in issue 6 was a little underwhelming. Hell, the mainline Star Wars comics at the time had better action panels than this. I liked how he drew Silo though. The scientist has a menacing, smug presence that even the Emperor would be jealous of. He was even drawn in the likeness of the artist, which is interesting. You want to see yourself die that much, huh? And on another note, the scenery and locales visited by Vader are truly impressive looking. The dank techno caves on Geonosis and the freaky space whale base being my favourites in detail alone. Other than that, I think that's everything there is to say on these issues because, frankly, not much goes on in this comic. It's considerably more slow-paced than the other spin-offs, but if you don't mind the slow burn and general intrigue, then these comics are surely worth your time. Just don't mind the occasional goofy character expressions or flat panels of boringness, and you'll find something to enjoy in this Darth Vader comic. Sorry this turned into a review of the comic as a whole. I just don't think there's much else you can get out of this Vader book unless it's stuff that really stands out. Maybe one of these days I'll make a video on the last 6 issues if there continues to be an audience for this kind of content. In the next video oh wait, the scores! God damn it. Issue number 1 is a good mood setter for the ongoing story of Vader proving himself to the Emperor once again after his last failure, and it's got some really impressive panels that are possibly the best art in this whole bunch of issues. All in all, it gets an above average 6 out of 10. Issue 2 is, I forgot what even happened in it. All it did was establish how much authority Vader lost, and it mentioned Aphra one time for the sake of shoddy foreshadowing. The art for the space battles were kinda cool, though I couldn't say the same for the down-to-earth panels of static talking. 4 out of 10, not good and can easily be skipped. Now, issue 3 wasn't my favourite, but the welcome shift in tone and the introduction of characters who surprisingly worked well alongside Darth fricking Vader is probably the biggest improvement, especially when compared to the last issue. For this, I give it a stellar 7 out of 10. The whole Geonosian plot was extremely enjoyable and a nice change of pace from the space battles and monologues. Who would have guessed that Star Wars could pull off zombie horror? With great writing and character dynamics on display, issue number 4 deserves an 8 out of 10, and possibly the highest point in the entire book. Issue number 5 was where it started to slow down a little and introduced the concept of Darth Vader replacements. I liked the characters, even if we didn't get to see them do much, but the setting was visually inspiring. It gets a 6 out of 10. And lastly, issue 6 had the long-awaited sparring session of the Sith apprentices, as well as the hauntingly effective scene of Vader realizing he has a son. How it should have ended was a fun scenario, but this comic's execution was certainly more moving. For these moments and the story's balance of fight scenes and crucial plot moments, it gets a 7 out of 10, a very decent issue before the more boring ones set in. And there we go, the first 6 issues that helped promote Darth Vader in the world of comic book spin-offs. It's hard to believe, but without these, those other awesome Vader comics wouldn't exist. It's just a shame that the visuals really don't hold up that much. Okay, I know I said I was going to look at Vader down, but I may just leave that for people to read on their own, and it's probably more issues than I can handle. For the time being, it's the new year! We are into 2022 at the time of this video. It's been 3 years since I made comic reviews on this channel, and I intend to continue doing so. I also wish to go back to my roots and gush or rave about Sonic comics, because good grief, I did that a lot, didn't I? However, perhaps I will take a break from the Archie Comics ones, and instead lean towards something more recent. With that in mind, the next video shall be about the first 4 issues of the IDW Sonic comics. It's been a long time coming, and while my thoughts on Archie Sonic's cancellation are still deeply in my brain, I think I have the air to breathe and finally express my thoughts on the new publications. Thank you ever so much for watching, if indeed you still are, and I'll see you in the next one.